Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for joining our debate round today. We are really excited to have all of you. And we really appreciate you coming. We have a lot of great debaters and really great judges and institutions here today. So the first thing we're gonna do is while some people are still filtering in, is we are going to have the judges introduce themselves. And so I'll call on the judges. And then we'll have our co-sponsoring institutions introduce themselves. I'll tell you a bit about the rules of the round, and then we'll get our debate started. So to have the judges introduce themselves, first, Al Ballard.
Okay, there it is. Good evening, everyone. My name is Al Ballard. I'm a pediatrician and medical director at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I'm also the former medical director of the D.C. Department of Juvenile Services and an active member of the National Commission for Correctional Healthcare, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to improving the quality of healthcare standards in facilities throughout the United States, correctional facilities, that is. So I'm very honored to be here and look forward to hearing the debate.
Awesome, thanks for joining us. Shaniqua Collier.
Good evening, everyone. I am also honored to be here. I am an associate professor at George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and my background is in bioethics and law.
Lauren Dweck.
I am very excited to be here as well. I am the Director of Strategic Communications at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law, which is affiliated with Georgetown University Law Center.
Thank you. And sorry, one second. Julia Lichtenstein.
Hey there, I'm Julia Lichtenstein. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a lawyer in private practice in New York, and I'm a Hopkins alum and was, for a time at least, a member of the debate team there. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And Stephen Ruckman.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So happy to be here with all of you. I'm Stephen Ruckman. I'm a former federal and state policy attorney and now deputy director of the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University.
Awesome, thank you. And Rachel Silverman.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here with all of you and very excited for this debate. I'm Rachel Silverman. I'm a policy fellow at the Center for Global Development, which is a think tank. I primarily work on global health policy from an economics and financing perspective.
Awesome. And Kate Zarama may be able to join us tonight to be the final judge as well. And she is with the Emerson Collective. So now I'd like to call on the different co-sponsoring organizations to talk a little bit about their organization. I'll start with the Rikers Debate Project and Ashley Carrington.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Carrington. I first want to just start off by thanking you all for joining us today. I also want to thank our partnering organizations, SNF Agora, the Hopkins Debate Council, the Brooklyn City College High School, and Johns Hopkins as an institution as well, the Undergraduate Debate Council, for assisting us and partnering us on this wonderful event. We're extremely excited for everything that's about to transpire. For some history on RDP, we were founded back in 2016, really with the goal of being able to advocate for the currently incarcerated community and formerly incarcerated community. And we did so by introducing a program that teaches competitive debate to these individuals. Our organization really focuses on multiple different pillars, but the first is obviously debate, the second being advocacy and reform, the third, reentry and fellowship, the fourth, community development, and then the fifth, individual support for our students. It is our goal as an organization to bring forth spirited debate topics to the community that allow for us to think about these critical areas, such as the one that we're about to dive into today. In addition, to us being able to offer these exciting events. Through us teaching debate to our students, we're also able to kind of be that bridge to them, such that they have somebody on the outside world that they're able to connect with. So I do hope that you guys enjoyed today's event. In addition to kind of thanking our partnering organizations, I did just want to take a moment to thank Rena Barch, John Bateman, Monica Mix, Michelle Tellock, and Kayla Ward, who all worked tirelessly to bring this event together. And so I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll pass it back over to Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. So now Oliver from the Johns Hopkins Debate Council.
Hi, everyone. Just a bit of background. I'm a senior at Johns Hopkins. I was the president of the team this past year, and I'm a current member of the Board of Trustees. We have one other Hopkins debater with us today. I think we have a few others watching the call as well, but Vara will also be debating, and he was our past treasurer. We debate together frequently, and we're both very excited to be here. I would like to thank the partnering organizations, in particular the Rikers Debate Project. I can speak from personal experience. It has been a dream of mine, even since high school, to actually debate with the Rikers Debate Project. And so it is very nice to bring that to fruition. For a little bit about the Undergraduate Debate Council at Hopkins, we have around 50 members, several of which each year are consistently nationally ranked. And we primarily participate on 2 debate leagues, the American Parliamentary League and the British Parliamentary League. Usually we are traveling around the country and internationally, attending showcase debates and whatnot. Obviously this year we are mainly traveling around the internet, but nevertheless, we're always excited to debate. Very happy to be here. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Josh.
Great. And now Patrick Daniels from Baltimore City College High School.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting us and letting these high school students join into this amazing opportunity with the Rikers Debate Project. We really appreciate it. Baltimore City College is the 3rd oldest public high school in the country, and our debate team has been in existence since 1876. We're recognized both locally and nationally as the oldest public high school debating program in America. And for the past 23 years, we've been the most successful speech and debate program in the state of Maryland. We teach the skills, Baltimore City College Speech and Debates teaches the skills of research, persuasion, and public speaking, and sometimes super fast talking, which is why I'm stumbling over my words, who might not, to students who may not otherwise avail themselves of this unique, especially within Baltimore City Public Schools opportunity. The speech and debate program is designed to optimize the potential of this population of students who have qualified for magnet school admission and will ultimately apply to and graduate from 4-year colleges. We offer a variety of speech and debate opportunities, including Lincoln Douglas debate, policy debate, public forum, Congress. We've done ethics bowl. We also do mock trial. We've made it to the state championships 4 times. We also have 17 different speech events, and I'm not going to list them all for you, but we participate in everything. The other thing is we've won 3 national championships in policy debate. And Ezra, one of our students here today, is the current captain and full-on leader of this team. And as Oliver was mentioning earlier, we are also normally a full national touring, national traveling team, thanks to the donations of people in Baltimore and the Baltimore region and other debaters that just love our program. And but this year we are traveling around the internet and still competing and still making it to break rounds of national tournaments. So thanks so much for letting us have this opportunity.
Thank you for joining. So now, so first there were a couple judges that I missed earlier on. Sorry about that. That I want to have introduce themselves. So first, Payal Patel.
Hey everyone, my name is Payal Patel. I'm an infectious diseases physician at University of Michigan and the Veteran Affairs Ann Arbor Healthcare System. And I'm a Hopkins alum. I'm looking forward to the debate. Nice to meet you guys.
Great. And then Kate Zarama I mentioned, but I wanted to give her the chance to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kate Zarama. I debated on the Hopkins debate circuit and now find myself at Emerson Collective, which is a social change organization that was started by Lorene Powell Jobs. I'm working on the oncology care team, so that's both life sciences and improvements in healthcare delivery. So very excited to see all of you here today.
Great. And just before we get the round started, I wanted to kind of just give a brief overview of what the rest of the event was going to look like and some of the rules for the round. So basically, our round has 3 speakers on each side. The 2 sides don't know which side they're going to be on. The two teams are going to flip a coin, or I'm going to flip a coin for them to pick which side they'll be on. And each team has one debater who's a fellow of the Rikers Debate Project, one who is a debater from Johns Hopkins, and one who's a debater from Baltimore City College High School, and they'll both be debating in that order. And the first 4 speeches of the round, so the first 2 speakers on each side, are what are called constructive speeches, where you can make new arguments. For those speeches, the first speech on the government is 3 minutes, the rest are 4 minutes. After that 4th speech, the audience gets to give 3 speeches of up to 2 minutes each. One speech will be in favor of the government, the pro team, in favor of the case to give COVID vaccine priority to people who are incarcerated. One will be against, and one will be a crossbench speech that makes points on both sides of the case. After that floor speech, then we'll have closing speeches, first with opposition for 3 minutes, and then for government for 4 minutes. One thing I should mention is that we keep pretty strictly to time in these events. So each speech has a 30-second grace period, after which we'll mute them. So 3 minutes 30 after the first speaker talks, we will mute them if they haven't finished speaking. And the audience also gets to participate. Besides the 8 judges voting in the round, each of the audience members will also get to vote as well. And the audience vote as a whole will count for 5 votes. So together with the 8 judges, that'll be 13 votes. I'll put the link in after the round is over, so people can vote online. And then let me think what else before we get to the coin flip, and then I can introduce the debaters. Oh, so after the debate round is over, the judges will be sent out to a breakout room to discuss for about 10 to 15 minutes their thoughts on the round. The judges won't be coming to a consensus, but it's a chance for them to kind of think about the round a little bit. And during that time, the audience will get to ask questions of the debaters. The debaters won't be on their sides anymore. They'll just be answering in their personal capacity. The judges will come back in, give their reasons for decision and their vote. We'll announce the result, and then we'll go to some breakout rooms of about 6 to 8 people each, so people in the audience can meet and discuss the debate. So with that, who from Team A of Camellia, Oliver, and Noah wants to call the coin toss?
I guess I'll call it since I'm the girl.
All right, sounds good to me. All right, what's your call for the coin toss?
Heads.
It is, I don't know if you can see this, but it is tails. So first, what is Team B? What side do you want to do?
Gov.
Yeah, Gov. Thanks.
All right, so Team B will be on Gov. And before they introduce themselves, let me also, I realized I missed, or someone helpfully reminded me that I missed calling on one of the sponsoring organizations. Let me have Stephen Ruckman from SNF Agora introduce SNF Agora before we start the round.
Thanks, Josh. And thank you to the Johns Hopkins Undergraduate Debate Council, Baltimore City College, and the Rikers Debate Project for including us tonight. The SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University is an academic and public forum that integrates research, teaching, and practice to improve and expand civic engagement and inclusive dialogue as the cornerstone of global democracy. We work by generating scholarly insights and transforming them into usable knowledge for civic and political actors who can enable real-world change. We were founded in 2017, the generous grant from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and we draw our name and inspiration from the ancient Athenian agora, which was a public marketplace that grew to become the heart of democratic governance in Athens a place where citizens learned and debated both the rights and responsibilities of democracy and where they developed capacities for participation in public life. So naturally, we were delighted when we were asked to be partners in this event, and we can't wait to hear tonight's debaters.
All right, thank you so much, and we're thrilled to have you. So let me now introduce our three debaters on each side. So on Gov, the first speaker is going to be Larry Williams from the Rikers Debate Project. The second debater from Johns Hopkins Debate Council is going to be Vera Mathiol-Khan. And then the final debater is going to be Ezra Pipik from the Baltimore City College High School. On the second team, Team A, on opposition, we have Camelia Finley from the Rikers Debate Project, Oliver McCannon from Johns Hopkins, and Noah Smith from the Baltimore City College High School. With that, I call this House to order, and I call on the Honorable Prime Minister, Larry Williams, to deliver the first constructive speech of the round, not to exceed 3 minutes. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, members of the audience, esteemed energies on the opposition. This is about incarcerated people, right? And whether they should receive priority for the COVID-19 vaccine. I want you to walk with me as I explain to you before I go over my 3 points. I want you to think about a cell, right? A cell, 4 walls, very close, usually 2 people inside of them, right? And now they're isolated, they cannot leave or go anywhere, and only maybe, just luckily, they may get an hour so that they can go out and wash their bodies. Let's talk about the trade-offs, right? Incarcerated people are uniquely vulnerable to COVID-19. You can't socially distance in a facility. And not only that, the staff or counselors who walk around that come in and out of society that often carry these germs. You cannot socially distance in a facility. And more so, I should call it a dungeon. It is inadequate in the medical regards. Can you think of you trying to call for medical while everybody around you is sick? It's disproportionately for older and sicker people. There are older and sicker people inside. The majority is older and sicker. You have less access to help. So just imagine somebody that's getting sick and they're on the gate or they're on the door or a bar and they're asking for help. But meanwhile, everybody else is asking for help as well. And the officer is one person amongst many. Sometimes it's hundreds, sometimes it's 250 of people requesting for help. What I'm saying to you is that the masks are limited, and then there's also insufficient and inadequate cleaning supplies. My second point is human beings. This global pandemic is not a punitive situation. This global pandemic is affecting mankind. I want you to think about that and really process that. See, what we're talking about is humanism, right? And humanism is to realize that the people that are inside, despite their crimes, are asking for help and they need help and they cannot go out there and seek help on their own. This is no matter what race, this is no matter what age, this is no matter what sex. This is about vulnerability. And I want to tell you another thing, which I shouldn't even have to explain in this part, is that there are pretrial innocent until proven guilty people that's inside there. There's also wrongfully convicted people that's inside there, and there's also rehabilitated people that's inside there. And I'm going to move to my third point. If you are not going to help them, then free them. We have a duty, a societal duty, to protect them. Those are the rules. I didn't make them up. The opposition will not agree with that last strong stance I made. Then if they don't agree, then it is their obligation to make sure that we care for them. When you're in prison and you're in isolation, there are all sorts of mental health issues. You know, depression is a killer within itself. And that people that are in these states for elongated times are not only suffering mentally, besides the physical part. And then there's people in there that have pre-existing conditions, and they should have care. What I want you to think as you start to hear other examples as to why, I want to remind you that they are citizens, they are humans, and they deserve to be helped because they cannot help themselves. They cannot walk over to a hospital. They cannot get on the phone freely and ask for help. They cannot even barely get an officer to come to their aid. So I ask you, as I close, to make sure that the vaccines are a priority inside each and every facility so that we can make sure we do the humanly duty and make sure that we are protecting our citizens.
You're here. The House thanks the Prime Minister and calls on the Leader of Opposition, Niqua, to deliver the first opposition speech of the round, not to exceed 4 minutes.
I would like the judges and I would like to thank the judges and spectators for coming out. Should people who are incarcerated be prioritized for COVID-19 vaccination? As the opposition, we believe not. And I am going to give 3 reasons, 3 points as to why. Point 1, if we prioritize prisoners, vulnerable groups in society will die. The definition of prioritize, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is to decide which of a group of things or individuals are the most important so that you can deal with them first. So what the government is saying is that we prioritize prisoners over the bus driver, over that subway driver, over that supermarket clerk who has to come into contact with hundreds of thousands of individuals daily, and they could contract COVID and potentially die, but they should be pushed down the list for the prisoner in the controlled environment. According to the United States Department of Justice, the average prison age is 30 to 36 years old. The courts have released the most vulnerable from prison since the onset of COVID-19, who would most likely contract it and die. 50 to 64-year-olds are 2.5 times more likely to be hospitalized and 9 times more likely to die. Prisons have a safer position than the general population because the environment is controlled and because more people have already been infected. Point 2, we shouldn't give priority to people who have opted out of society by virtue of their behavior. We expect for certain limitations to be imposed on you when you're sentenced. I know that while I was incarcerated, I expected to receive specific things, medical care and food. I felt entitled to adequate medical treatment, but I did not feel entitled to priority for scarce medicine while there was a pandemic going on. The United States Supreme Court in U.S. versus Alvey stated, admittedly, prisoners do not shed all constitutional rights at the prison gate, but lawful incarceration brings about the necessary withdrawal or limitation of many privileges and rights. And point 3, funding rapid COVID-19 vaccine rollout trades off with already scarce prison medical care. There's a strain and additional cost. Funding for faster vaccination has to come from somewhere. We're talking about a rapid national rollout of new vaccine. The resolution does not include budget increases for prisons, meaning any funding must come from pre-existing medical care, according to the Department of Justice. The government has claimed that there's a vulnerable society in prison, that there's no social distancing. This is a controlled environment. It's not an ideal place to live, but it's more controlled than society today. And the government also claimed that the majority older and sicker are inside of prison and that they could die, but they've already been released. And then the government talks about humanism and not saying that they shouldn't, we're not saying they shouldn't be vaccinated. We're talking about prioritizing them during a vaccination. And the government again talked about freeing them. They've already begun to free those who were most vulnerable since the onset of COVID. And for these reasons, we feel like we have proven our point that they should not be prioritized for COVID-19 vaccination. And I yield the rest of my time.
You're here. The House thanks the Leader of Opposition and now calls the Member of Government Vera to deliver the second government speech of the round, not to exceed 4 minutes.
All right, just to confirm, can everyone hear me? All right, first off, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me here. It's truly an honor to do this. And with that being said, I'll start my speech now. First, I think it's pretty important to characterize what makes a prisoner different than anyone else in society. The same examples that came out of the last speech, a bus driver, a nurse worker, a grocery store, etc. It is the exact reason that their autonomy is restricted, which is why the state ought to owe them more protective care and ought to go the extra mile of giving them a vaccine. If I'm a bus driver, if I'm a normal person in society, I can choose where I go with, who I interact with. I have essential freedoms that are still guaranteed to me. These freedoms are not afforded to prisoners who are forced to confine to certain spaces, who are forced to confine certain food, certain schedules, et cetera, et cetera. This limitation on freedom is the exact reason for why government ought to owe them more reparative obligations. Secondly, under this, and which is pretty crucial, is I think, first off, the lack of adequate access to medical care is another reason, which is why you should afford prisoners more access to the vaccine. Why is this the case? Because a lot of the times in more mild cases of COVID-19, you can get treatment to it, right? Or you have access to medical resources that can mitigate the effects to it. This same type of resource is not afforded to those in prisons where there is some of the worst medical care out there. With that being said, then, we think it's pretty important that you ought to offer vaccination because what would be a mild case in some outside situations does not apply to the population that we're talking about. And the last reason, which is why we ought to consider those in prison different than everywhere else, is exactly what comes out of Larry's speech, right? Not everyone in prison is guilty. Some people are there before they go to trials. Some people have been wrongly convicted. Some people are in there for rehabilitative care. So all of the moral considerations for why someone ought to deserve or not deserve something don't apply to these people because they're strictly innocent, right? Or they haven't been convicted of a crime and they shouldn't be forced to endure this cruel and unusual punishment. But the second thing I want to say, responding to what comes out of the last points, is this idea of because you have chosen to opt out of society, you don't deserve these different types of benefits. First off, I would say that's the exact reason why we have a court, right? That's the exact reason why you have a judicial process. You go through the judicial process to decide what your punishment ought to be. There's no clause stated when you go into a courtroom saying, oh, you're going to have 20 years in prison and maybe a chance of not getting a COVID-19 vaccine or not. The punishment and all of that stuff has already been decided, meaning at that point in time, we think that one, withholding vaccine to this population is cruel and unusual punishment. And secondarily, we think that it just extends past the limitation of what punishment ought to be. So we don't think those same moral concerns apply here. Cool. Moving on case, right? I think it's pretty important to characterize what is the best argument that opposition can make. They can say that they're perfectly able to socially distance. They can say that they're perfectly able to make a prison safe. You're able to separate out people, whatever. Why is this, even their best world, still really bad? Because it forces prisoners to be alone from one another, right? If you're in strict confines, maintaining strict social distancing puts prisoners in isolation. This is abhorrent. Why? Because we already know from the crisis of solitary confinement going on that putting people away from each other, especially in a prison environment, is hugely harmful to mental health, right? It makes people feel more alone. It makes people feel more disconnected from society. This is the most vulnerable population that we ought to consider. So again, clashing with government's point about, oh, we ought to care about the most vulnerable population. I think this is the population that we ought to care about, right? This is the people that cannot choose themselves where they travel, where they go to, et cetera, et cetera. We ought to care about this mental health benefit specifically, right? Because this is important, not just for a prisoner while they're dealing with the moment, but the long-term ramifications, what type of person they are once they get out of prison, right? Or how they move on and recover from their lives. These have lasting impacts, and we ought to consider them in this debate. So the last thing I want to say, and the last thing I just want to close out my speech with, right, is this idea of humanity, right? Because yes, we are moving towards the end of this pandemic, but at the end of the day, this is a human issue, right? COVID can affect you regardless of what race, what gender, what sex you are, et cetera. At the end of the day, we think it is important to prioritize those at the bottom of society who do not have the resources to fend for themselves versus other people in society who have comparatively better means to do so. Doing so increases access, just sets a good precedent overall from a principled level. And I think overall is just the more humanitarian lens to go. We're very proud to propose.
The House thanks the member of government and now calls on the member of opposition to deliver the final constructive speech of the round, not to exceed 4 minutes, after which we'll do 2-minute floor speeches. Oliver, go ahead.
All right, I'm just going to go straight down the flow for off-time roadmap. Again, thank you all for the invite. Very happy to do this. Okay. The first thing that VARA tells you is that you uniquely owe these prisoners more protective care because of the situation that you are putting them in. I think the problem, though, is that the government does not ever have an obligation to do a type of policy that isn't going to work. I.e., if you want to give a vaccine to a really vulnerable population, but you do not have the infrastructure to provide them the vaccine, you do not have an obligation to do that policy. We think that medical infrastructure in prisons is so bad that the government is unable to adequately provide people with vaccines. And from a utilitarian perspective, it is always more effective to go toward channels where you can efficiently and effectively distribute the vaccine. I think the second response, though, is that it isn't quite clear that you should always target the most vulnerable population for vaccination first. Rather, we think that there are certain situations in which it is always better to vaccinate workers, healthcare workers, frontline workers, insofar as those individuals are responsible for creating the conditions by which we can collectively fight the virus and then begin to vaccinate other individuals. Right. I also think the other thing here, though, is that it isn't necessarily clear that we are in some way shirking government's obligation to prisoners. If on the opposition side, we are taking the time to develop the medical infrastructure necessary to eventually get vaccines through prisons, then we are still fulfilling government's obligation to do this, and much of our argumentation falls by the wayside. The second argument they give you, though, is that you just need to offer these prisoners medical care because things are really bad in the status quo. Two responses. The first is that you're going to have tremendous long-term backlash. Look back to our first points, right? You do not have the funding to do this, which means you're going to have to take funds from other programs that people care about, or there's going to be conservative backlash to the idea of giving lots of prisoners lots of vaccinations. People are going to say, my grandmother died of COVID because a prisoner got a vaccine and I didn't get a vaccine. When these types of things happen, you're going to have tremendous backlash against prison reform. We think that there are endemic issues in prison that are much bigger and much more important than the virus, speaking from the long term, that there are substantial reforms that Congress needs to make, except that they are too dysfunctional to do this. And if you have long-term conservative backlash against this policy, you are literally never able to do this because you've expended all of your political capital giving vaccines to prisoners. The second response, though, is just, again, you need to build up the system first to do this. You need to provide prisoners the medical system to, survive in prison over the long term. If you do not adequately build up the resources and just shove a bunch of vaccines through prisons, you A, don't better the medical infrastructure in the long term, and B, have no capacity for solvency because you have backlash against people in charge. Then VARA tells you that this constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, and thus the government has a constitutional obligation to do this. I think the problem, though, is that more than this, the government has a normative obligation not to mess policies up, right? Again, the government shouldn't do things that aren't going to work, right? The government has an obligation to make sure that healthcare in its prison systems is good, because then it can go onto the international stage and not have human rights issues in its closet. This means that we can have more effective foreign policy because we aren't getting constantly criticized as we were last week. We have a normative obligation to make infrastructure better, to better things for everyone. But I also just think that, one, people have already been released from prison who are especially vulnerable for the disease, and two, a lot of people in prison have already had it. I don't necessarily know then that going forward, you're going to constitute cruel and unusual punishment when you do not give people the vaccines, right? I also just think that, look, you end up making conditions worse in the long term and have cruel and unusual punishment when you have backlash against anyone trying to create substantive prison reform. That is not a system where you can actually better things in society. You have long-term hard on the scale of magnitude that is always greater on their side of the house. But then they tell you this is going to put prisoners into isolation. Again, go with the backlash argument, right? If you have backlash, you're never able to actually get reform in terms of putting prisoners into isolation in the first place, which means on our side of the house, if you deprioritize this, build up the medical infrastructure, you still have the political capital in the long term to get rid of things like isolation and to provide the mental health services which actually better things for prisoners in the long term. I am incredibly, incredibly proud to propose.
You're here. The House thanks the member of opposition and calls on the audience for floor speeches. I had one request from, let me find them, from Meg Kendarpa to do a floor speech for Gov. Meg, go ahead, not to exceed 2 minutes.
Sounds brilliant. Am I audible?
Yep, your video's on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm wearing, I'm in like my PJs, so I'll have my video off for this purpose.
Not a problem.
I think that the reason that government is the most important is for two things. One, that backlash is not going to change. So conservative power that is against prison reform is not going to happen because prisoners can't vote. So the reason that you don't have Republicans violently going for prison reform is because you don't need their voices for your next constituents. You don't need to theoretically listen to your voices. So the ability to shut them out happens in the political space. This is why it's gotten so problematic, where the COVID-19 regulations must happen and are legally required to. They do not, because voices can be shut out incredibly easily. But secondly, I think that it's really important to recognize that the 8th Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment also goes to the extent of what you're being punished for. This is touched upon, but I think it's also in the freedom of contract. That is to say, I'm expected to be punished and changing actions dependent on what I did wrong. So if I caused harm, I can only learn about that. But I did not cause harm to have a global pandemic upon me. I did not cause harm to have somebody else turn around and infect me who did not try to either. Voices that are majority BIPOC, who already have a failing healthcare system, who already are not represented, continuously shut out from what the expectation is, but you caused the harm beforehand. Comparably, we have all caused harm beforehand in our lives. We are just lucky that the police system doesn't double down upon us for every mistake that we made beforehand. We are just lucky that we didn't get caught because we don't look like the people that you want to punish, to victimize, to pull money out of. The reason why vaccines get prioritized here is because most areas have mechanisms of social distancing. You have a house, you have a right to stay in your area, you have methods of PPE. But when you share one mask per person because you messed up 20 years ago because the system failed you, you are being held to an unreprehensible standard, a standard that will only affect a certain group, and a standard that is ignored by the voices. Backlash is insufficient because no one will care and no one will listen because their voices don't make money. Incredibly proud to stand for God.
Hear, hear. Thank you for your speech. And we'll have Charles give a floor speech for OP. Charles, go ahead.
Yes, we have heard this outlandish argument in relation to why prisons should be prioritized over society. And this is the issue. The issue is not that they're not going to get the vaccination. No, the issue is who get it first. And we're saying that as members of opposition that society should get it first. The members of opposition spoke on the issue of Supreme Court said that prisoners have to expect the right to have certain limitations placed on them upon their incarceration. This is not saying that prisoners should not get medical treatment. This is saying prisoners should not be given priority over medicine when a pandemic exists. The member of government went on to say that this is a humane issue. What's more humane than having people in society, bus drivers, the grocery store workers, people that's constantly going back and forth in society, go home and take this virus to their children and create a massive more pandemic? Or the fact that the members of opposition has already established that the most vulnerable in prison are being released. Another point that the government failed to recognize is that in prison, when you're dealing with a prison, and I was in prison, I did 48 years in prison, so I know this to be a fact. In prison, you have a situation where you can be isolated. But more importantly, if you give priority to the prison over society, then the prospect of them stealing it, misusing it, and abusing it for any other reason to give it to a prison is very likely. So we say this, that the issue is not whether or not to give prisoners the vaccine. The issue is whether or not they should get priority over people in society that have not opted out for because of their behavior. And for these reasons, we oppose.
You're here. Thank you, Charles, for that speech. And the final floor speech of the round is going to be to John Bateman for a crossbench.
Thanks, Josh. I thought both sides did a phenomenal time here today. So I'm just going to make one argument that I haven't heard from each side. For the government side, I think that prioritizing prisoners for the COVID-19 vaccine is more than anything an opportunity to make a radical statement to the public at large about the human value of prisoners. We heard from the opposition that there could be a conservative backlash that could affect the course of politics. I think that sort of goes in the other direction. If you're worried about scarce political capital, this is a game that prisoners are always going to lose. They're a very marginalized group, and they've been powerless for centuries in our society. The only way that prisoners are ever going to be treated better is to actually start conversations and challenge people's views about the fundamental humanity of prisoners. So creating a controversy like this over the place of prisoners in society is the exact right approach toward a more radical reconceptualization of their role and their stature. And now is the right time to do that, as we're having a broader reckoning with the criminal justice system and its fundamental fairness. But on the other side, I think an important point for the opposition is to broaden our view of this debate beyond the United States and thinking internationally. Yes, we can consider who should get vaccines more quickly within the United States, but ultimately, probably most people in the United States who want a vaccine, including prisoners, will be able to get one within the next few months. Meanwhile, there are countries around the world who haven't gotten any vaccines and who won't for years. And those are people who haven't even opted out of American society. They were never given the opportunity to be born into a society wealthy enough to develop and procure these vaccines. So for America to fulfill its role in the broader world, it would send a powerful message to divert some of these vaccines to undeveloped countries and then allow prisoners to be vaccinated over the next few months.
All right, thank you, John, and thank you to all of our floor speakers. Now I'm going to call for the closing speeches. To start, Noah, the closing speech for OP, in a speech not to exceed 3 minutes, reminding you that new examples are welcome, but new arguments are not. Noah, go ahead.
Thank you. I will start now. So responding back to their backlash argument, with the funding going into these wrong things, there will be much stronger backlash from things like the right. Larger families with both parents being essential workers who both have to go outside of their homes are already at risk from these things such as COVID, and they need these vaccines right now so that way they can take them home to their younger children. These marginalized communities need these things right now as they already do not have adequate access to these medical devices. Now, we're not claiming that these prisoners should not get the COVID vaccine. We're claiming that we need to prioritize these more marginalized communities, okay? The government has claimed that, but this is wrong because we are at a more vulnerable, no social distancing rule. This is a controlled environment that they have. No, this is not an ideal place to live in, but it is more of a controlled environment than the society that we live in now. Also, majority older and sicker people are outside of this place right now, and they have already released those people from the prison, okay? On the humanism argument, we are not saying that they shouldn't be vaccinated. We are talking about how there is a priority that needs to be met right now. And then they also claim that we need to start freeing these people, but these courts have begun this process already since the onset of coronavirus. So on the last argument, we're not saying that we should not vaccinate these people. We just need to have greater prioritization because they are already in this controlled environment. And we need to bring this normalcy back into the real world so that way we can eventually get these vaccines to the people inside of the prisons. They also claim that there are not enough help or resources in the prisons, but there are not enough help or resources outside of the prisons either. There are less adequate fundings for hospitals in these marginalized communities, in the by people of color communities. So we need to give them these resources right now. If we prioritize prisoners, vulnerable groups will die right now. They would kill these vulnerable groups by not giving them their access to these things. They claim that bus drivers have this more freedom, but they also have freedom, not freedom, but they also have this confinement in prison. They don't need to go around and interact with other people. They are confined to their cells. where they do not have to interact with others. Outside, though, as I stated, these essential workers or these parents or these larger families who go everywhere, they are at greater risk than people inside of a prison. So we need to prioritize the people who are in greater risk right now. And I have 3 seconds left. So.
All right, the House thanks the closing speaker for opposition and calls on Ezra, the closing speaker for government, in a speech not to exceed 4 minutes. Hear, hear.
Okay, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for putting all this on. All right. 20% of prisoners are infected. Infection rate is 5 times the general rate. The mortality rate is 3 times normal, and that's even age adjusted. Prisons limit mask use, PPE, and most importantly, enforce limited social distancing and quarantining. The overcrowded prisons of America are perfect for transmission of an airborne disease. The reproduction rate in prisons was 8.44, meaning that every infected person entering a prison infects 8.5 people on average. Prisoners are underrepresented, unprecedented risk of contraction, and prioritization is the natural step. The opposition talks about prisons like a bubble. They say that facilities aren't real society, but this marginalization of prison populations is exactly why the infrastructure is not in place already. COVID is more dangerous to people in prisons. The impacts of getting the disease can be exacerbated by the conditions in prisons. Access to doctors and medicines is extremely limited for incarcerated people, and increased COVID in prisons incentivizes increased use of solitary confinement as a method of quarantine, which is detrimental of mental and physical health of inmates. One of those, isolation in solitary presents a danger of becoming depressed, feeling alone and anxious, and more. Even if an inmate doesn't get COVID, they are still impacted negatively by the only natural step when trying to enforce quarantine in a situation like a prison that is so packed with people. The opposition states that we should not prioritize prisoners as they are not the most vulnerable populations. They talk about families and young people, but the prison environment, despite being controlled in a sense, is dangerous and deadly as far as the disease goes, as proved above. Prioritize these individuals for all the impacts unique to the prison experience and for other reasons that I'm about to get to now. All people are equal. Their lives and health are equally valuable and worth protecting. The pandemic is not an issue of worthiness or of opting out of society. It is a natural phenomenon that affects every single person equally if they get it and makes none of the distinctions that we are conditioned to. If this motion more effectively prevents death and illness from COVID-19, prefer it over the incongruous and unorganized rollout of the status quo. This is where it's important to remember that the opposition doesn't present a plan. The opposition is simply opposing the motion, and so this just leads to the status quo of an unorganized plan. Also, on their on the argument about like building infrastructure of medicine in prisons, this is about priority or no. Rejecting this motion silences the movement, and there is zero reason to believe substantial criminal justice reform is imminent in the status quo. Also, all the impacts of creating infrastructure are contingent on the survival of prisoners. Prisoners are dying of COVID-19 at a huge rate right now, and anybody who dies is not going to be able to access any of the good things that they say they can do. On backlash, they say long-term conservative backlash against prison reform is always going to exist. This argument destroys any possibility for reform at any point in the future. If we are unwilling to risk our nebulous political capital on stopping a crisis-level disease in prisons, at what point will progressives actually go for what they want? As John mentioned, the only hope for prison reform is to drag the issue into the spotlight by doing controversial reforms that are morally just and defensible, like this. Once we force people to view incarcerated people as just like them, terrified of the pandemic and at risk, steps to true reform and changes in infrastructure become much more likely. If you agree with the impacts of true infrastructure changes and the things that they talk about as far as foreign policy and making us like more humanitarian, then the motion is the most effective measure. This also answers the money trading argument because the only way to increase public perception of prisons and prisoners is to take risks like this. Our society responds to people breaking the law punitively. We confine them and strip their rights if we think that they're criminal. We limit access to healthcare and competent medical advice, as well as remove the ability to take personal steps like social distancing and protect oneself from disease. By refusing to make up for these issues with vaccine prioritization, we make the pandemic a part of punishment. We send the message that when you are sentenced to prison time in the US, your life is considered expendable in times of crisis. The increased risk of illness and death is part of the deal when you are sentenced to prison time. This can't be allowed to be the morality of our government. We have an ethical obligation to protect prisoners, not just because they are vulnerable, but because we, as the government, made them vulnerable in this fashion. Also, remember the argument that so many people in prison are awaiting trial or wrongfully convicted or have been rehabilitated. Wrongfully convicted people and people who have not yet been proven guilty should under no we are under an obligation to protect them at all costs. And the fact that those people exist in the communities in prison and in these facilities means that we must vaccinate and we must achieve herd immunity in prisons. Thank you. I'm honored to present the motion.
All right, here. Thank you to our debaters. You all did a great job. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna put in the chat a way for the general audience to vote, which is on that form. The judges, I'm gonna send out into a breakout room in just a moment, and then we will start our panel once I've done that. So just give me a second. All right, so we should have sent our judges off to their breakout rooms. And so now for our panel, our 6 debaters will answer questions from the audience. And they're answering not in their capacity of being on a particular side, but just kind of personally. And so if you have a question, you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or you can ask it in the chat and I will read the questions or message me and I will read the questions in the chat. While we're waiting for people to think of questions, I will ask the first one, which is, what was so I'll start with just, what was an argument from the other side, for each of the panelists, that you thought was a particularly strong argument in the round?
I'll answer that. So being as though I was on opposition for the government's side, I think their strongest argument was the humanism. I have been incarcerated. And I think one of the biggest things for incarcerated individuals is that society deems us less human, even in incarceration and outside of incarceration. So I think that was the strongest argument that they had going forward, is that, you know, that it's just a human thing to do. So that's how I would answer that.
What did other people think?
I don't know. I'm personally pretty much of the government opinion very solidly. So I don't know. I didn't find a ton of those arguments like super compelling to me personally. But I think that the arguments about like the current medical infrastructure being lacking and like if it's not going to actually do anything, then is it like worth doing? Were kind of persuasive in that like even if you send doses of vaccines there without increasing the actual funding of like the current medical facilities and access to doctors, then like how much of a difference could that make? I'm not sure.
I think op is quite actually a difficult side from a debating perspective and perhaps also from a societal perspective. So I liked a lot of the government case, but I would actually agree that the equality point for me, the humanism point, is probably one of the most important. I think also in combination with the floor speech that we got from John, that prison reform is an incredibly difficult issue, and in some way that you have a lot of really entrenched opinions about prisoners and the way that prisons work, and so making some sort of statement, really shaking things up and causing a conversation, is probably going to be the only way that you access substantial prison reform in the future. So I thought that was quite persuasive, but everything about humanism as well.
So Caleb asks if people know of examples for how states or other countries are treating this issue, and do those support or refute the arguments that your side made in the round?
I guess I'll just say one thing I noticed in my research, which was interesting, is that at the state level, the reactions to COVID have been pretty different. Not all states are releasing prisoners due to COVID. In fact, there are, I think, 11 states that aren't doing any releases at all. So I think that makes it more challenging from a debating perspective, because it's harder to just make homogenous arguments about one single thing, because states are kind of proceeding differently along different tracks.
One question I have, an issue that we're going to be hearing more and more about is the issue of vaccine hesitancy, of people who have vaccines available but don't want to take them yet. And I'm curious, both for those of you who have been incarcerated, how you expect vaccine hesitancy and attitudes towards the vaccine to play out in jails and prisons, and also just for all the panelists, what are ways that we can address or reduce some of the things that cause vaccine hesitancy in a correctional context?
I definitely believe that is going to be an issue for incarceration. You're talking about individuals who 90% of them suffer from a mental illness, and they are not getting adequate treatment inside of this facility for a mental illness. And so to ask them to take a medication that they know very little about probably will not get as much information as we are able to get in society, where we're able to talk to doctors and able to look up research. And so you're asking them, lift your sleeve up and let me inject you with this, and they already have mental issues. That is definitely going to be a problem inside of prisons, where, again, I am a returning citizen, and where we rally behind wanting to get this vaccine for prisoners, we have to remember that you'll bring it into these prisons. And I believe that the majority of them will not want to. The telephone will begin, and people will whisper in people's ears. They'll get misinformation. They'll pass it along. They'll say, oh, do you know this will cause this? You'll get sick. You're already terrified because the medical care is not what it should be in prison. So you're like, oh, you'll get sick if you take it. So I think that I can't get my word out. I think that's definitely going to be an issue. And I think the biggest way to solve that is transparency, which is another issue for government agencies. They do not know how to be transparent in prisons and in jails, but they have to be. They have to be transparent. They have to get as much information out there to the prisoners as they possibly can. They have to allow them to be able to ask questions, and they have to answer these questions with honesty. There has to be purity in the things that they say. And I think that would make it so much more easier for the prisoners to take it. But if you just say, line up and let me inject you, you're going to have a problem, and it is not going to turn out the way we are all hoping for loved ones, and as a returning citizen that we hope that it will. It's not going to turn out that way unless the prison can be transparent.
Can I hop in on that? A lot of what she said I agree about, but I think the bigger, well, I'm speaking from also being formerly incarcerated. I thought about letting that be out there, but I was kind of hesitant in my debate because I wanted you to look at me not pro because I was formerly incarcerated, but more so because of the arguments. But what I can tell you is that I personally know people that died from it, COVID inside, and I would like to say I believe people who have pre-existing conditions, they're going to be more apt to take it, right? But as another example, I think the biggest thing is the choice, right? They should have the choice to be able to make that decision. And I definitely agree with the transparency, and I definitely know and understand that there's a lot of mental health issue there. But you know, people are dying in there, and you know, the way news goes is different. News doesn't cover people dying in prison that much, you know? So I just wanted to give you that, and I just wanted to say that there should be a choice.
Hey, Josh, can I say one thing on that real quick?
Oh, sure, Charles, go ahead.
I'm on both sides, but I'm gonna give you an example of how misinformation is in prison. And I was in prison. When the AIDS epidemic existed in prison, you had people literally saying people had the virus and then would not go near them or would not touch nothing they had because they had all this misinformation about what this is. So when you have a situation like this here, and I know I have friends that have passed away from COVID, but when you have a situation like this here, you have mental illness, you have illiteracy, and then you have people that think they so smart, they read everything and misinterpret it. So then they create a proliferation of misinformation. Oh no, see, they experimented to Tuskegee, man. It's all that all over again. So people be opting out for those reasons. But the reality is that transparency has to be the number one thing. You have to answer all the questions. And I believe you answer all the questions and get that communication going, people take it.
And I also wanted to call on other member of our audience, Dr. John Winters, who's an infectious disease physician at Rikers, to give us a perspective on this question of vaccine hesitancy at Rikers and in other correctional facilities.
Yeah, so I am an infectious disease doctor at Rikers. I'm also at Bellevue and Mount Sinai in non-correctional setting. And you know, as many of the members here have alluded to, social distancing in correctional settings is virtually impossible, especially in closed air dorms where there's not significant air passage through the dormitory. And you have multiple cohortings of people within a setting, up to 40 patients within a specific dorm. So social distancing does become significantly challenging, as well as masks become challenging. It is true that people are given a few masks or one mask to be able to use for a duration of time in order to try and protect themselves from the COVID virus. Another thing is that so I did want to talk about the vaccination availability at Rikers. Currently, within Rikers, 2 vaccinations are currently being made available to persons who are currently incarcerated, and that's the Pfizer vaccination for people who are not in intake facilities, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccination for people who are in intake facilities. And so every person who meets New York State criteria is currently able to receive the vaccination at this time. There are teams going around through all of the dormitories as well as the intake facility, trying to make available the vaccination to as many people who meet New York State criteria. And it's the same eligibility criteria that's for the New York State general public as it is in Rikers Island at the moment. And so just to give a little bit of an idea of what vaccination is like in the facility, transparency is clearly the biggest, one of the biggest challenges that does happen. I think there is an effort to try to be as transparent as possible about the vaccination. It's also really difficult from a lot of the population who have a mistrust with the vaccination, with the system, and medical providers and the system as a whole. And so, I do completely understand why people who are incarcerated would be hesitant to take the vaccination. And I think there's been a pretty big effort from the medical staff within the facilities to try to really communicate about the importance of vaccination, the importance to the persons who are incarcerated, the potential importance to the families of people who are incarcerated, and the potential for a positive impact of receiving the vaccination and what that can do for people once they are released into the community as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that really insightful answer. So we're going to have our judges come back, and they should be coming back in 30 seconds. I guess while we're waiting for them, let me just ask one quick final question, which is, one of the arguments made in the round was that incarcerated individuals have decided to, quote, opt out of society in view of their actions. But a lot of the people who are incarcerated have not been convicted yet. They're in pretrial detention. And how, are there any arguments for prioritization being different for people in pretrial detention versus people who are who've been convicted and are sentenced? Any thoughts from the panel on that question before we wrap up real quick?
If you look at the current flow of the judicial system during COVID, a lot of prisons and a lot of judges and a lot of jails, well, not prison, because if you're pretrial, you've not landed in prison, so you're in jail. And so a lot of jails have opted out of even bringing people physically into the jail unless there is a violent crime. So we can't really use pretrial as an argument. Most people are going to court via video. They're not even going into a jail because they don't want to bring people in there. A lot of judges are immediately releasing individuals that they could potentially give a court date to later on down the line. So I really don't, I was released a year early from my initial sentence because of COVID, and I was actually in prison at the very onset of COVID. So I don't really think that that's an argument, per se, just because they're not really letting them in.
Okay, well, thank you to our debaters. Great job, both as debaters and for the panel. So now let's have our judges tell us the results and why they made the decisions they made. I think we might have lost one of our judges, I'm not sure. But so I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. I'll call on each judge, and they'll give a 30-second to 60-second explanation of how they saw the round and which side they're voting for. And just remember, for members of the audience, if you haven't gotten to vote yet, please fill out the form that I'm going to resend in just a moment. So first, Al, do you want to go first and give your reason for decision?
Sure. All right, great. So we talked, and I thought that both sides did an excellent job. Very, very good, very organized. For me, I thought that the stronger argument, in spite of my own personal opinion of this matter, but the stronger argument was really made by the opposition. And the main reason for that is that I thought that they did a really good job talking about the issue of prioritization. I don't think they came across with this idea that we would not vaccinate any of the prisoners, but when it came to prioritizing and then marginalized population, because we know that there's a lot of talk about vaccine equity, particularly in underserved communities. And so I think that argument really stood out for me. I think that the government really missed an opportunity to really stress the idea of this, to really counteract this whole idea of prison being a controlled environment, which we know that it's not, because most of the people who are incarcerated are contracting COVID from security officers and staff who work there. And so I thought that would have been a great opportunity to really sort of stress that level of vulnerability. But overall, very good job on both sides, but I voted for the opposition.
Thank you. And next, Shaniqua.
Hi. First, fascinating arguments on both sides about an incredibly important topic. The debates on both sides were impressive, and everyone presented really compelling arguments. So this was actually very difficult for me. But my vote boils down to one really important argument, and that has to do with prioritization. Who should we prioritize was really the essence of what we were here for. And I just thought the opposing side did a much better job, really through examples, even highlighting what might be a utilitarian approach. What is the most effective? And the opposition rather made that point. And the government, I don't think, really spent enough time on debating that point about what's effective, what is going to help the most people. And the fact that the opposition even mentioned that the most vulnerable people were released really even helped to strengthen that argument that really the best way forward here is to do what's most effective, and that is to prioritize people who are outside of the prison system. There were also some notations about some facts that might have been incorrect presented by the government, and so that also impacted my view. So I'm voting for the opposition.
Thank you. Lauren?
Just to reiterate what the others have already said, incredibly impressive, excellent presentations and speakers on both sides. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I feel very honored and privileged to join this. There were 3 arguments that were very compelling to me. First, I think that the government missed the opportunity to outline the severity of the COVID outbreak in prison population specifically. That happened toward the end of the round, but that would have been, I think, a much more compelling argument had it been made earlier in the constructive speeches instead of in the rebuttals. Second, I think the government spent a lot of time talking about the backlash argument, which I think the opposition very effectively combated and was not compelling to me. And then the opposition won my vote essentially because of the argument that the most vulnerable in the prison population have already been released. Therefore, the prioritization should not necessarily go to people in prisons. So I'm voting for the opposition.
Thanks. Julia?
Hi. So to echo a lot of what's been said, I thought everyone did a fantastic job. So many very compelling and very clearly made and really nicely signposted arguments. Like I thought just people's form and cadence was across the board really, really nicely done. Not to again sort of repeat some of what's been echoed by other judges, but ultimately, you know, I came into this thinking that this was really a no-brainer and that of course incarcerated populations should be prioritized, but the opposition did a fantastic job changing my notions that I had coming in and did so in ways that I thought were both unexpected, but also just very concise and compelling. I'll echo what Al said, that I thought that the government missed an opportunity to sort of talk about the porous nature of prisons, that these aren't really just these self-contained areas that don't interact with the outside world at all. They interact with the outside world quite a bit and have a lot of effect. I really, you know, again, was really swayed by the compassionate release argument that so many folks who are particularly vulnerable have been released. That was a great, great point. And like a lot of others, thought that it really boiled down to prioritization. You know, the vaccine hopefully will become available to, you know, many of us, all of us in the coming weeks and months, including those who are incarcerated. And so thinking about this from the perspective, not just of who should get it at all, but who should be prioritized, I thought the opposition did a better job kind of crystallizing those reasons. And that the government missed some opportunities to poke some holes in their points. So, but again, this was a really tough call, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Payal?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I am gonna go in the opposition and actually am voting for the government team. I wanted to shout out Larry for your very humanistic argument. I actually really enjoyed your pauses. They were very helpful in me thinking about your argument. Vera, from a infectious disease perspective, you talked about mild and moderate cases. You know, if you're not incarcerated, you can self-isolate at home, not use the same bathroom as your family. You know, all of those things that you were talking about are not only hard on yourself, but you're more likely to spread. And then Ezra, you just hit it out of the park with those statistics. Those are the things that I kind of had boiling in my head as I was thinking about the argument. So I thought you guys both did a great job, but I disagreed with the other judges and voted for the government.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, both sides did an incredible job and raised a number of arguments that I certainly would not have thought of. You know, and just to echo, you know, some of the points already made, I definitely think the government came out strong with arguments about the vulnerability of the prison population, but what impressed me was the opposition really diffused that set of arguments, both with the compassionate release and also discussing just vulnerability that exists outside of prisons too. And I also thought the opposition's argument about resources was, really was new to me and really made me think about, what does it mean? And later arguments built on that in terms of the utility of trying to have this vaccination problem at the expense of other costs, and also well played on mentioning that resource problems exist outside of prisons as well, to kind of diffuse one of the government's points in reply. So on balance, I would say, that the opposition swayed me.
Okay, and Rachel?
Yeah, so to echo what everyone else is saying, thank you all for the arguments, really fascinating and very well done. So I think in some ways the government had a harder job here because they had to demonstrate not just that the incarcerated populations were deserving of vaccines, which I think they did quite compellingly, especially Larry in making the discussion of incarcerated people's fundamental humanity, but they had to make the argument that they should be prioritized, that they should actually be put above other people in the line. And I think that's fundamentally what we're all saying it came down to. I think there were quite a few strong arguments from government on that point, and especially Ezra's speech towards the end brought in quite a few of the relevant statistics. But I think that those arguments probably needed to be made earlier and on a more forceful thread across the entirety of the argument. And there were a few missed opportunities, I think on both sides, but to really drive home, why would it be that prisoners need to be at a higher priority than everyone else? And there are epidemiological arguments for that. There are social arguments. I think the argument that the government made that was best taken from me on that point was just that they do not have the autonomy to help themselves, that they are constrained in this way, and therefore there is a certain obligation to them. But I think they were just not made as forcefully as they could be, and the opposition did quite a strong job of rebutting them and making counterpoints. So I'm voting for the opposition, but again, with a terrific job done by all.
And do we have Kate here still, or do we lose her? I think we might have lost our last judge. But that's okay. So we have on a 6-1 judges vote, and then the floor vote from the audience was 25 to 23 in favor of opposition. So that's going to be out of 6 votes, that's a 3-3 floor vote. And so overall, a 9-4 vote in favor of opposition. So great job to both sides. And now what we'll do is we'll have breakout rooms for 15 minutes. So I'll kind of divide everyone up, and you can talk to some of the other attendees about what you thought about the round and things about the topic. So thanks so much for coming, and hope you all have a good discussion in your breakout rooms. Okay, where do I want to join? How do I join?
So like how did the discussion go in the back in the back room there that ended up